Welcome to this week's edition of the Garage Workshop, and today we're going to be making a chicken coop. Roll the credits. I created a very basic plan in Sketchup. If you've never used Sketchup before, it's a lot easier to use than you would think, and I watched a really great video which helped me, and I'll link that in the description. So I did a very basic box cube shape using the same method that you would use if you were building a partition or a stud wall. And as you can see here, I just left a couple of spaces for openings and a big gap on the end for a door. This also generated a cut list, but I didn't actually end up using it. So I had my finished design, and that was what I used as a plan for the coop. So after planning the coop, the first stage was to build the foundation that the coop would sit on. I had a very specific idea in mind. I wanted to create a foundation that was very strong, but also had space underneath for the chickens to roam around in. So I wanted to use a substantial piece of wood for the foundation of the coop. So here I'm just using normal, average, everyday treated fence posts. I got these fence posts from B&M because they were $4.99 for a 6 feet post. Once I cut the post to the correct length, I then drilled holes. First I drilled a small hole so I would be able to countersink the coach bolts later on, and then I followed that up by drilling a longer hole inside. So to support the coop, the plan was to design a framework of legs very similar to ones that you would have on a standard table at home, and then the coop could sit on the top of that. Once all of the holes had been drilled, the next thing was to put the frame together, and as you can see, I'm using a square, right-angled square to make sure everything is true. These are fantastic, these squares. I'm very lucky I've got access to a 3D printer, and I just designed them and created them myself, and they're absolutely perfect. So I attached it to the square, and then I used a bigger clamp to hold it, which allowed me to drill in the coach bolts. Huge apologies here, I forgot the camera was there and I stepped right in front of it. But the coach bolts, I got a standard length decking coach bolts. When the joining was done, I stood it up and I put in the last long beam. Now I had to be very careful doing this because I wanted it to be exactly true, and it's very difficult sometimes when you're putting two pieces of wood together and there's only one of you to try and make sure it's right. But with this, I was able to just attach one end and then attach the other end, and it worked fine. The next stage was to put in the cross members, and as I said, I wanted this to be super strong and super secure. Although the gap was exactly the same, the exact same measurement, it was just over 80 millimeters. This one, as you can see, went in fine. It was nice and tight, exactly what I would have expected it to be. But the other one, which was cut exactly the same on the miter saw, cut to the same length, I used my miter saw stop. The other beam was just slightly out by about probably not even a mil, and I think that was because when I cut it, it had a slight ridge on it, and you'll have seen in the video I just sanded it off, and I think I used too big a grit sandpaper because it probably took off a little bit more than it needed to. So not a problem, I just secured it with some clamps, which allowed me to screw it into place. Once the frame was created, the next thing to do was to see how it would fit. So I offered it up to the space, and I wanted to make sure that the edge of the frame was going to be close enough to the edge of the frame of the coop that I could attach it if I wanted to, depending on how heavy it was, Although when it was built, I realised I didn't have to worry about weight because the coop weighs an absolute ton. So that was the first thing. I wanted to be able to attach it to the coop. I didn't want it to go completely off the edges, but I wanted it to go close enough that a chicken couldn't sort of squeeze out between it. And this base that I created was 1.8 meters long and a metre wide. I picked those measurements specifically. Well, A, the fence posts that come from B&M were that length anyway, and I didn't really want to be cutting them up too much. And B, the length of the coop was just over 1.8. It was about 1.9 metres, and as I said, I wanted to have a little bit of space either side. So once I'd laid it down and saw it was a good fit, I just tied a bit of cable to the edge of the coop, round it around some wooden pegs, and it gave me the area so I could then begin to clear the gravel and dig the hole. Once I had the area marked out, it was a case of removing the gravel. This area is outside the kitchen door at my house, and the gravel is a bit inconsistently laid, to say the least. In some places it's a good 10 or 15 mil deep of gravel, and in other places like this, the weed barrier is about 5 centimetres underneath the top of the gravel. So you can see there as I'm raking, I've done very little raking and I'm already pulling up the weed barrier, which in some ways is an advantage, but in other ways is a real disadvantage because A, the chickens can peck through it, and B, it's just not very neatly done. When I'd raked the surface down as low as I could, something very important happened. A, I got really bored of using the rake, and B, I found it much easier to use the shovel at this point because the level of gravel was pretty much the same throughout the whole gap. As you can see all the way through this footage, I had some very interesting views from the chickens who were very much keeping an eye on what I was doing, and I was able to throw them the occasional worm. They do like a good worm, chickens. So I continued using a shovel for the rest, and then we got it completely level all the way down to the weed barrier. I got some help from Mrs. B when it came to digging out the weed barrier because the soil where I live is very clay based, and it really was hard to get some of it out. If only you were that fast in real life. The great thing about having that speed up function when you're making videos for YouTube is all your hard work can just disappear in seconds. So after we cleared the gravel, I just cut and pulled back the weed barrier, and I just wanted to make sure again that the frame had fitted in the gap that we had laid out. As you can see, there were a couple of little issues where the pebbles had sort of rolled back into the hole with the weed barrier on both sides, and as you can see on the edge there's a row of pebbles that I've deliberately left there that run up and butt up against the coop. I did that very specifically because of the way the chicken wire was put into the ground when I installed the coop. I didn't want to move all that stuff out of the way until I was ready to put the frame in, because otherwise potentially the chickens could have lifted the chicken wire up and got out of it. So it took a bit of fettling. You can see the place where I am now, there's a lot. It's very deep with the stones there. So it took a little bit of fettling to get the exact size I wanted, but when it was done, it was done. Now we came on to the digging, and huge respect to anyone watching this video who has to dig holes for a living. As you will see, this is a very small hole. It's not very big at all, and it's very shallow, and I made the most ridiculous hard work of it. It took me ages, and I got absolutely shattered. Now, I am, in my defense, going to say that it's because of the clay soil. But I just think, A, I'm unfit, I'm not used to digging holes, and B, it was the end of quite a long day. So I shared the digging hole responsibility with Mrs. B, and she came in and took over. But before you know it, we had the hole dug. After I dug that gargantuan abyss, I went back to the frame, and I wanted to put the legs on and then at least offer it up so I could check that it worked properly. Very straightforward. I cut all of these on the miter saw using my stop, and then it was just a case of drilling the holes in. I used exactly the same process as I'd used with the other ones, so they're all countersunk in. The coach bolts went in, no problem. You probably won't see in the video, I don't think I included the footage, but I did spend quite a long time with a square making sure they were all level, which they were, and I also measured off camera to make sure that they were all exactly the correct distance apart, which they were, which was a relief. I was really impressed with this timber that I got from B&M. I know you can get timber from lots of places, and you know, I'm a big fan of places like B&Q and Wickes. I get a lot of stuff from them. I don't buy from sort of timber merchants, but B&M have a really great garden centre, and a lot of their stuff is very reasonably priced. So these posts that I paid £4.99 for, they were just basic standard 4 feet fence posts, I think, and they had exactly the same product in B&Q, and they were £9.99. They looked exactly the same to me. So you do have to be careful. You have to pick the quality ones, and quite a lot of them were, I wouldn't consider, they're either bowed or had large knots in them, or you know, bits missing, or weren't completely square. So you do have to pick and choose, but I think buying from places like B&M is just as good as buying from B&Q. I'm sure they all come from the same place anyway. As you can see from this badly out of focus spirit level clip, it was exactly level. So next thing I did, I, with the help of Mrs. B, because by now it was quite a lot of weight. So we put it in, it fitted perfectly. So the next stage was to put this chicken wire on. I deliberately chose different chicken wire. I didn't want the bigger normal traditional chicken wire sort of hexagon shape for this part. I wanted to use something that was much smaller, so I bought this chicken wire on a strip, and again I got it from B&M. It was £12.99 for a roll, and the roll was absolutely perfect. I think we just got a tiny bit left over. I used my brad nailer here and used the staples, and really frustratingly I sort of got halfway round and ran out of staples, which always tends to happen. Even though I thought I had more than enough, I didn't. So we used a little hand stapler, and I've got a roofing stapler as well. So we used both of those, and to be honest, they did just as good a job. Got all the staples in, and we had very little problem. It was very straight all the way round. A bit more problematic on the top, but we'll come to that. So when I'd attach the chicken wire all around the outside of the coop, as you can see, it's nice and straight there. The next thing I did, and I realise now I made a huge mistake here. I should have done this beforehand because it was actually quite difficult to sort of fettle them round. But I just put a bit of damp-proof course on the feet. I don't think I needed to do that because, with the exception of two pieces, it was all the treated ends of the timber that were down. But I just wanted to make sure, be doubly sure I suppose, that the wood will last as long as it possibly could. So I just got some damp-proof coursing, I just put it on the end and sort of capped each of the feet to just help protect them in the weather when they're in the soil. After we'd got everything stapled and how we wanted it, I just cut down the sides to put on the final piece of the chicken wire, which was going to cover the entire base. This section of the video I am now going to rename Death by Cable Ties. It was without doubt the most frustrating part of the foundation of the build because I wanted to make sure that the sections weren't loose, so we had to cable tie them all together, and as you can see in the video, incredibly fiddly to get one cable tie through and then attach it through 2 or 3 different pieces. It was very frustrating. After a while I think we decided that this was not a very sensible way of doing it, so Mrs. B and then I got inside, and one person fed the cable ties through and the other person sort of finished them off because it just became absolutely ridiculous. So there's the last bit of cage going on. You can see it, and you can now see the entire shape we were going for. So when we laid the foundation down in the chicken coop, we covered the piece that you can see now with soil, and in the final chicken coop we put all of the soil back in so that the chickens have got somewhere to scrub around and have a dirt bath in. But this part of the video was incredibly frustrating. As you can see, we've got the base of the coop has now been wired and it's in place. I know from where you're looking, it probably doesn't look very straight, but it is. I've leveled it. It's absolutely straight. So we've just filled it back through the soil. So that's the end of the groundworks now. Moving on to the coop. So catch us in the next video where I'll be constructing the coop that's going on this frame. Happy woodworking. Bye-bye.